Costa Rica doesn't announce itself the way some places do. There are no vast, empty plains stretching beyond sight, no brutal winds that stop you from walking, no landscapes so large they make you feel irrelevant. Instead, Costa Rica works differently. It pulls you in close. It layers things on top of each other until what looks simple on the surface reveals something far more complex underneath. And once you start paying attention, you realise that almost nothing here is accidental. This is one of the most biologically dense places on Earth, packed into a country smaller than West Virginia, yet holding more species of plants, birds and animals than the entire United States and Canada combined. That fact alone should change how you look at what's coming. But biology is only part of the story. To understand Costa Rica, you also need to understand its geography, its weather, its cultural logic, and the way its people have made choices that most countries never seriously considered. Without that foundation, the places we're about to explore look like beautiful scenery. With it, they start to make sense. Costa Rica sits in Central America, bordered by Nicaragua to the north and Panama to the south. It covers roughly 19,700 square miles, or about 51,000 square kilometres. That's a country you could drive across in a few hours under ideal conditions. But ideal conditions are rarely what you get here. The terrain works against speed. Mountains run through the centre of the country like a spine, with several peaks rising above 12,000 feet, or around 3,600 metres. These mountains don't just define the landscape visually, yet they divide the country into completely different climate systems. On the Pacific side, you get a pronounced dry season and wide open skies for months at a time. On the Caribbean side, rain arrives with little warning and rarely takes long breaks. In the mountains themselves, temperatures drop sharply and clouds settle in for days without lifting. Three different worlds, sometimes within 50 miles of each other. That fragmentation is what makes Costa Rica function the way it does. Microclimates stack up so tightly that you can start a morning in tropical heat and end it wrapped in fog at elevation. Roads that look straightforward on a map turn steep, narrow and unpaved within a few miles. River crossings appear where bridges haven't been built. And rain, when it comes in earnest, it can change road conditions faster than any forecast anticipates. The country receives between 80 and 200 inches of rainfall per year, depending on where you are, or roughly 2,000 to 5,000 millimetres, making some regions among the wettest inhabited places in the Western Hemisphere. That water doesn't disappear. It feeds rivers, waterfalls, wetlands, and cloud forests that exist nowhere else in the same form. It's the engine behind most of what makes this country extraordinary. Volcanoes are the other engine. Costa Rica sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, directly above subduction zones, where tectonic plates grind against each other continuously. The country has over 60 volcanic formations, roughly a dozen of which are considered active or potentially active. These aren't just geological footnotes. Volcanic activity has built the soil that feeds one of the most productive agricultural regions in Central America. It has created the thermal features that define entire landscapes, and it has shaped coastlines, rivers and highland plains that would look completely different without centuries of eruption and resettlement. For the people who live near active volcanoes, this is simply the background of daily life. Monitoring stations track activity. Communities have evacuation plans, and most days the volcanoes simply sit there, steaming quietly, reminding everyone of the forces operating just below the surface. The country holds roughly 5% of the world's biodiversity within its borders, a figure scientists and conservationists still find remarkable given the size of the land. This density exists because of position. And Costa Rica sits at a biological crossroads where North American and South American species meet, overlap, and compete. Animals and plants from two continents have been mixing here for millions of years, producing a layered ecosystem that rewards patience and attention in equal measure. More than 900 species of birds have been recorded here, more than in the entire continental United States. Over 9,000 species of plants, hundreds of reptile and amphibian species, and mammals ranging from jaguars moving through remote forest corridors to small monkeys navigating canopy trails just above the roads. None of this happened by accident. Costa Rica made a deliberate decision decades ago to protect its natural systems rather than exhaust them. Today, roughly 25% of the country's land is protected in some form. A commitment that shapes everything from tourism to foreign policy to the daily rhythms of rural communities. That decision is worth keeping in mind as the journey begins. The Central Valley is where most of Costa Rica's population lives and where most journeys start. Sitting at the elevations between 3,000 and 4,000 feet, or roughly 900 to 1,200 metres, the valley enjoys a climate that's consistently mild by Central American standards. Temperatures rarely climb above the mid-80s Fahrenheit or drop below the mid-50s, creating what locals have long called an eternal spring. The capital, San Jose, sits at the centre of this valley. It's a working city in the truest sense. Traffic moves heavily through its streets. Markets operate from early morning. Neighbourhoods shift character from block to block, mixing older architecture with modern construction and street life that runs well into the evening. San Jose doesn't spend much energy trying to impress visitors. It functions, and in doing so, it gives you an honest look at how Costa Rica actually operates on a daily basis. The surrounding valley tells a quieter story. Coffee plantations step up hillsides in neat rows, taking advantage of the elevation, the volcanic soil, and the reliable rainfall that makes this region one of the world's most respected coffee-growing areas. The harvest is slow and careful. Much of it is still done by hand, with pickers working through rows of shrubs, selecting only the ripe red fruit. It's a process that requires skill, timing, and patience. Those qualities appear repeatedly throughout Costa Rica in different forms, in different places. Northwest of the Central Valley, the terrain opens and the sky gets wider. This is Guanacaste province, and it feels like a different country entirely. Where the rest of Costa Rica trends toward green and wet, Guanacaste runs dry and golden for months at a time. The dry season here, from roughly December through April, turns the landscape into rolling savannas dotted with the wide, spreading forms of Guanacaste trees, the national tree of Costa Rica. Their canopies stretch flat against the sky like something from the East Africa. This is cattle country. Large ranches called haciendas have shaped the culture here for centuries. The Sabanero tradition, Costa Rica's own version of the cowboy, runs deep. Rodeos, horsemanship, and a slower pace of life tied to livestock rhythms define communities that have changed less than most other parts of the country. The coast along Guanacaste's Pacific edge is where the dry season becomes most dramatic. Long beaches stretch between headlands. Surf breaks draw waves that arrive with consistency and force. And sunsets over the Pacific here have a particular quality, burning slow and deep through air that carries just enough dust and warmth to make the colours push toward red and orange long after the sun has technically disappeared. Wildlife in Guanacaste behaves differently than in the rainforest. Animals adapt to seasonal scarcity. Dry forest species have evolved strategies that their wetter counterparts never needed. Some trees shed their leaves entirely to survive the dry months, temporarily making the landscape feel almost skeletal before the rains return and green pushes back almost overnight. Santa Rosa National Park sits within Guanacaste and represents one of the oldest and most historically significant protected areas in Costa Rica. The park protects one of the last remaining stands of tropical dry forest in Central America, a habitat that has been cleared even more thoroughly than rainforest throughout the region. What survives here is genuinely rare. The dry forest in Santa Rosa shifts character with the seasons in ways that feel almost theatrical. During the dry months, trees stand bare and skeletal, light filtering down to the ground through branches that would normally block it. Then the rains come. Within days, the same landscape transforms. Green spreads fast and visible. It's like watching time-lapse at normal speed. The park's coastline adds another dimension entirely. Nansite Beach here is one of the most important nesting sites for olive ridley sea turtles in the Pacific. During mass nesting events called arabatas, tens of thousands of turtles come ashore within days of each other, covering the beach in a density of movement that is difficult to describe accurately. It's not sightseeing. It's witnessing something operating entirely outside human scale or schedule. Moving inland from Guanacaste, the land begins to rise again. The air cools, vegetation thickens, and the volcanic peaks of the Cordillera de Guanacaste come into clear view. Rincón de la Vieja is the most active volcano in this range, and it makes its presence known long before you reach it. Sulphurous steam rises from vents. The mud pools boil slowly at the surface, thick and grey and constant. The ground near these features is warm to the touch, and the smell of volcanic gases carries on the breeze before any visual landmark appears. The volcano itself rises to about 6,286 feet, or roughly 1,916 metres, and its flanks support a remarkable transition of ecosystems. Dry forest at the lower elevations gives way to wet forest as altitude increases and moisture builds. Rivers fed by volcanic activity cut through the hillsides, dropping into waterfalls that fall through dense vegetation into pools below. Wildlife here uses the terrain differently than in more uniform environments. The variety of habitats stacked within a short vertical distance means that an unusually wide range of species occupies the same general area. What Rincón de la Vieja demonstrates More clearly than almost anywhere else in the country is the connection between geological activity and biological richness. The volcano isn't separate from the ecosystem. It's the reason the ecosystem exists in its current form. Arenal volcano is the image most associated with Costa Rica internationally, and the reality holds up to that reputation. Rising to 5,358 feet, or about 1,633 metres, its near-perfect conical shape dominates the horizon around the northern lowlands in a way that feels almost deliberately cinematic. Clouds frequently wrap around its upper third, parting in brief windows that reveal dark rock before closing again. For most of the 20th century, Arenal was considered dormant. Then in 1968 it erupted with little warning, reshaping the surrounding landscape fundamentally and reminding communities nearby of what geological dormancy actually means in practice. The area around the volcano has since developed into one of Costa Rica's most visited regions. Lake Arenal, a large reservoir shaped by human engineering but fed by natural rainfall and runoff, stretches to the west of the volcano and creates a wide open foreground that emphasizes the peak's height and isolation. Consistent winds funnel through the gap in the mountains above the lake, making this one of the best windsurfing and kiteboarding locations in the Americas. The surrounding lowlands are dense and wet. Rivers move heavily through flat terrain where caimans rest along banks, and kingfishers work the water with precision. Hanging bridges cross forest canopy at height and giving access to a layer of the ecosystem that's normally invisible from the ground. Up there among the treetops, the forest operates as its own world. Different species, different light, different rules. The Monteverde region sits at cloud forest elevation, and from the moment the road begins climbing toward it, the environment makes its intentions clear. The air changes first, cooler, heavier, carrying moisture even when rain isn't falling. Then the vegetation closes in. Trees covered in moss, bromeliads and orchids crowd the roadside. Streams appear where none were visible moments before. Cloud forests exist in a narrow band of elevation where temperature, moisture, and wind combine to keep clouds in near permanent contact with the forest canopy. The result is an environment perpetually between states, not quite raining, or not quite dry, not quite bright, not quite dark. Moisture drips from leaves that never fully dry out. The ground stays soft. Sound carries differently here, muffled and close. Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve protects one of the best preserved examples of this habitat in Central America. It was established in the 1970s largely through the efforts of local Quaker settlers who had moved to Costa Rica from Alabama decades earlier. Drawn by a country that had abolished its military in 1948 and offered a form of stability rare in the region at the time. That history matters because Monteverde's preservation wasn't just policy. It was a community decision made and maintained by people who understood directly what they were protecting. The quetzal is the bird most associated with cloud forests throughout Central America, and Monteverde is one of the most reliable places to see it. The resplendent quetzal, with tail feathers that can extend beyond 2 feet in length on males, was considered sacred by pre-Columbian civilizations across the region. Seeing one in the forest feels less like birdwatching and more like encountering something that belongs to a different category of experience entirely. Dropping down from the cloud forest toward the Pacific coast, the landscape opens dramatically. The humidity of elevation gives way to salt air in the particular light of a coastline facing open ocean. Manuel Antonio is one of Costa Rica's most visited national parks, and its combination of accessible beaches, clear water, and wildlife visible from the sand itself explains why. The park sits on a small peninsula south of the town of Quepos, where forest runs directly to the beach. White-faced capuchin monkeys move through trees at the forest edge and occasionally onto the beach itself, operating with a confidence that makes clear they consider themselves residents rather than visitors. Three-toed sloths hang in the branches above trails, barely moving. Three-toed sloths hang in the branches above trails, barely moving. Their slow metabolism perfectly suited to a life that requires almost no urgency. Brown pelicans work the shoreline in loose formation. Scarlet macaws, increasingly rare elsewhere in Costa Rica, have a stable population here. Their red and blue and yellow colour catching the light when they cross open sky between trees. Manuel Antonio demonstrates something important about how protected areas function in Costa Rica. The park is small, covering just over 16 square miles, or about 41 square kilometres. But its small size is part of what makes it manageable. Visitor numbers are limited per day, trails are clearly defined. The buffer between human activity and sensitive habitat is enforced rather than suggested. The result is a place that absorbs significant tourism without the ecosystem showing the strain. South of Manuel Antonio, the road follows the Pacific coast through a stretch of Costa Rica that sees fewer visitors and operates at a quieter tempo. The Osa Peninsula eventually appears, pushing out into the Pacific with a shape that suggests it knows it's going somewhere important. The Osa is remote in a way that most of Costa Rica isn't. Roads wash out in the rainy season, river crossings can become impassable for days, towns are small and services are limited. Yet the infrastructure signals clearly that this place wasn't built for easy access and that the difficulty has protected it. Corcovado National Park occupies most of the southern part of the peninsula. And it is widely considered among the most biologically intense places remaining in the Americas. National Geographic has called it the most biologically diverse place on Earth, a description that has been tested by biologists who keep finding reasons to stand behind it. The park holds all 4 species of Costa Rican monkeys, 2 species of crocodilian, 5 species of sea turtle that nest on its beaches. Large cats, including jaguars and pumas, tapirs, and an overwhelming density of bird life that rewards anyone willing to move slowly and look carefully. Access to Corcovado is intentionally controlled. Visitors must travel with certified guides. Trails require planning and permits. These rules exist not to make the park exclusive, but to make it survivable for the species living inside it. Corcovado functions as a reminder that conservation in practice requires more than good intentions. It requires daily decisions about who gets in, how many, and how they behave when they do. The Caribbean coast of Costa Rica exists in a different emotional register than the Pacific. The change begins the moment you cross through the mountains. Light flattens. The air becomes heavier. Rain is never entirely absent, and the cultural texture of the communities shifts visibly, reflecting the Afro-Caribbean heritage that defines this coastline and its history. Limón province stretches along the Caribbean shore, only connected to the rest of the country by road through mountain passes and by the railway that was built at enormous human cost in the 19th century to link the banana plantations of the interior to Caribbean shipping routes. The history of that railway and the banana industry it served is not easy history. It involved forced labour, foreign corporate control, and displacement, but it also produced communities with distinct identities, music, food, and a relationship to place that survived economic upheaval and remains present today. Cahuita National Park protects one of the most significant coral reef systems on Costa Rica's Caribbean coast. The park is split between forest and reef, with trails running along the coastline through vegetation that stays green year-round and wildlife that includes monkeys, sloths, and a remarkable density of land crabs that emerge in numbers that make the ground appear to be moving during certain seasons. The reef offshore, though affected by agricultural runoff and coral bleaching events tied to warming ocean temperatures, still supports an underwater world of fish, sea fans, and marine life that rewards the modest effort required to swim out and look. Tortuguero sits on the northern Caribbean coast, accessible only by boat or small plane, and the effort of reaching it is part of what makes the experience feel distinct from the rest of the country. The town itself is small, a narrow strip of land between a canal system and the open Caribbean, home to a few thousand people who have built a community around fishing, conservation work, and the tourism that the sea turtles bring. Yet the canals of Tortuguero extend inland through a flat, riverine landscape that feels closer to the Amazon basin than to the mountain country just a few hours to the west. Manatees move slowly through deeper channels. River otters appear briefly before disappearing into vegetation. Jesus Christ lizards, named for their ability to run across water on their hind legs, sprint across the canal surface when disturbed. Green turtles and leatherback turtles come ashore to nest on Tortuguero's beaches from July through October. In numbers that have recovered significantly since the community shifted from hunting turtles to protecting them starting in the 1950s. That shift didn't happen because of outside pressure alone. It happened because local people understood the connection between the turtles' survival and their own economic future. Tortuguero is one of the clearest examples in Costa Rica of conservation working not as an imposition, but as a community logic. The turtles survived because the community decided they were worth more alive than harvested. That decision required patience and trust in outcomes that took years to materialize. The Sarapiquí region in the northern lowlands connects the Caribbean slope to the base of the central mountain range, and it moves through landscape that feels continuously alive. Rivers here run fast and clear from the mountains above, dropping into flat agricultural land where pineapple and banana plantations spread across former forest. The tension between what the land was and what it has become is visible and honestly felt. Where forest corridors remain along riverbanks and hillsides, wildlife uses them intensively. Spider monkeys travel long distances through these corridors, requiring intact canopy to survive. Jaguars need even larger ranges, moving through fragments of forest that must connect across agricultural land to remain viable. The conservation effort in Costa Rica isn't just about protected parks, it's about what happens between the parks. Wildlife corridors, reforestation projects, and payments to landowners who maintain forest on private property are all part of a national strategy that recognises no park is large enough to function entirely on its own. Sarapiquí makes that strategy visible in a way that more remote areas don't. You can see the problem and the response at the same time within the same view. Turrialba volcano region east of San Jose offers a perspective on active geology that feels more immediate than almost anywhere else in the country. Turrialba has been in a period of elevated activity in recent years, periodically sending ash columns into the sky that close the international airport and coat surrounding farms in grey dust. Communities within range have developed routines around eruption alerts, the way coastal communities develop routines around storm seasons. Ash is swept from rooftops and fields, livestock are moved, and when activity quiets, normal rhythms resume until the next alert. The Turrialba River below the volcano is a different story, fed by highland rainfall and volcanic springs. It runs through a gorge that has made it one of the premier whitewater destinations in the Americas. Yep, the rapids here are consistent, powerful and long, moving through walls of tropical vegetation. In a corridor that feels entirely removed from the agricultural landscape above. The river doesn't feel like a tourist attraction. It feels like what it is, a river doing what rivers do in terrain that gives them no reason to slow down. The Chirripó Massif in the Talamanca mountain range represents a side of Costa Rica that most visitors never see. Mount Chirripó is the highest peak in the country, rising to 12,530 feet, or about 3,819 meters. And the trail to its summit passes through more ecosystem transitions in a single day's hiking than most places offer in a week. Starting in oak forest at mid-elevation, the trail moves through Páramo, the high-altitude grassland found throughout the Andes and its northern extensions. Where wind works, the landscape bare and plants grow low and dense against exposure. The summit itself sits above cloud level on clear days, offering views that extend from the Pacific to the Caribbean. A perspective that makes the country's narrow width feel almost impossible given everything it contains. Getting to the summit requires a permit. An overnight stay at a refuge near the top, and weather conditions that don't always cooperate. Many people who attempt Chirripó don't reach the summit on the day they plan. They wait, or they try again. The mountain doesn't adjust its schedule, and that's entirely the point. The Nicoya Peninsula extends into the Pacific from the northwest. A long finger of land separated from the mainland by the Gulf of Nicoya and connected by ferry crossings and interior roads that wind through dry hills and small communities. Nicoya is one of 5 places in the world identified by researchers as a blue zone, an area where people live measurably longer than average. And where rates of chronic disease are significantly lower than in surrounding regions. The reasons researchers point to are not exotic. Diet built around beans, corn, squash, and vegetables grown locally. Physical activity woven into daily routines rather than scheduled separately. Strong community bonds and a cultural practice called Plan de Vida, loosely translated as reason to live, that keeps older residents engaged and purposeful rather than isolated. The Nicoya Blue Zone doesn't look like a wellness destination. It looks like small towns, family farms, and people who have maintained a way of life that more developed parts of the world abandoned in the pursuit of convenience. That simplicity is the point. Costa Rica's decision to abolish its military in 1948 is mentioned frequently in discussions of the country, and it deserves more than a passing reference. The president at the time, José Figueres Ferrer, took a constitutional hammer to the wall of a military barracks in San Jose and handed the building over to be converted into what is now the National Museum. The money that would have gone to maintaining an army was redirected to education and healthcare. Costa Rica now has one of the highest literacy rates in the Americas. And a public healthcare system that consistently produces outcomes comparable to far wealthier countries. Life expectancy here is higher than in the United States. That fact doesn't appear in a natural landscape or a national park, but it shapes everything about how Costa Rica operates and what it has been able to become. Countries make choices. Some choices compound over decades into outcomes that look like good fortune, but are actually the result of decisions made deliberately. Early and maintained even when pressure to reverse them appeared. Costa Rica is a case study in what that looks like in practice. The Pacific coast south of the Osa Peninsula thins into a stretch of land approaching the Panamanian border, where towns are sparse and the coastline alternates between river mouths, mangrove systems and beaches that receive almost no foot traffic for months at a time. Mangroves here do work that's easy to overlook. Yeah, they filter agricultural runoff before it reaches the reef. They provide nursery habitat for juvenile fish that will populate offshore waters as adults. They absorb storm surge, protecting coastlines in ways that concrete infrastructure cannot replicate. And they store carbon in quantities that make them disproportionately important in the broader calculus of climate stabilisation. Costa Rica's mangroves are protected, but protection and full health are not the same thing. Upstream agricultural practices affect water quality. Sea temperature changes stress the ecosystems that depend on stable conditions. The challenges here aren't invisible, they're simply playing out on timescales that require sustained attention rather than single dramatic moments. Returning north, the route closes back toward the Central Valley. And the country's complexity comes back into view in concentrated form. Within a few hours of San Jose, you can reach cloud forest, dry forest, active volcanoes, Caribbean coastline, Pacific beaches, highland perimo, and some of the most biodiverse lowland rainforest remaining in the Americas. That proximity is not normal. Most countries with this range of ecosystems spread them across thousands of miles. Costa Rica stacks them, and moving between them requires not just physical travel, but a constant adjustment of expectations. What works in one environment doesn't work in another. What you see in one habitat won't appear in the next. The country demands the same quality that runs through its own ecological systems: adaptability. There's a phrase Costa Ricans use more than almost any other: Pura Vida. Translated literally, it means pure life. In practice, it functions as a greeting, a farewell, an expression of gratitude. An acknowledgement that things are fine, and a philosophy about how to move through the world without excessive urgency. It's used so frequently that it can start to feel like a tourism slogan, but its persistence across all contexts, in rural communities as much as in cities, among older generations and younger ones, suggests it's describing something real. Costa Rica is not a perfect country. It has poverty, inequality, deforestation pressures, and political complications like anywhere else. But it has also made choices across decades and across different governments to protect natural systems and invest in human development in ways that have produced measurable results. The landscapes we've explored aren't just beautiful, they're evidence. Evidence of what happens when a country decides that its forests, rivers, coastlines and volcanoes are worth more intact than converted.